In March 2021, a single ship ran aground in Egypt and cost the world nearly $9 billion a day. The Ever Given, a container vessel the length of 4 football fields, wedged itself sideways across the Suez Canal and stayed there for 6 days. Hundreds of ships stacked up at both ends. Fuel prices spiked. Factories in Europe waited on parts stuck somewhere in the Red Sea. The incident was almost comic in its simplicity. One ship, one canal, one sandbank. The consequences were global. That single episode revealed something most people never stop to consider: how much of modern civilization depends on one strip of water cut through the Egyptian desert. The canal connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. It eliminates the need to sail around the entire African continent, a detour of roughly 7,000 miles. Between 12 and 15% of global seaborne trade passes through it every year, carrying goods such as crude oil, liquefied natural gas, automobiles, electronics, grain, and medicine. Egypt earns over $8 billion annually in transit fees. These are large numbers, but the canal's significance is not simply economic. It is one of the rare places on earth where geography, history, and power converge. The idea of cutting through the Isthmus of Suez is ancient. Egyptian pharaohs tried it, Persian kings tried it, the Romans used a version of it. Each time, the channel silted over or fell into disuse. What's changed in the 19th century was not the idea, but the technology and the will to impose it. Ferdinand de Lesseps, a French diplomat of extraordinary self-confidence and questionable ethics, secured a concession from Egypt's Said Pasha in 1854 and began digging in 1859. The construction lasted a decade. It relied initially on corvée labor, a system of forced conscription by which Egypt's peasants were compelled to work without meaningful pay. An estimated 1.5 million workers passed through the project over its lifetime. Tens of thousands died from cholera, exhaustion, and accidents. This is the foundation of the canal, not engineering ingenuity alone, but mass human suffering imposed on people who had no say in the matter. Steam-powered dredges accelerated the final years of construction. The canal opened on November 17, 1869, to a ceremony of European grandeur. Empress Eugenie of France attended, held on land that Egyptians had bled to build. From the moment it opened, the canal was not Egyptian in any meaningful sense. The Suez Canal Company, the Franco-Egyptian enterprise that built and owned it, was headquartered in Paris. In 1875, Egypt's financially ruined ruler, Khedive Ismail, sold Egypt's 44% share of the company to the British government for £4 million. British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli bought it without consulting Parliament, a bold, arguably reckless act of imperial opportunism. Britain now controlled the most important shortcut between its home islands and the crown jewel of its empire, India. British troops occupied Egypt in 1882 and remained in the Canal Zone for over 70 years. They were not guests. The Canal Zone became a military fortress, a symbol of how European powers treated the territories they depended upon, as infrastructure to be managed, not nations to be respected. For Egyptians, the canal was a wound as much as a waterway, something of theirs that was not theirs. That wound would define Egyptian politics for generations, and it would finally rupture in the summer of 1956. Gamal Abdel Nasser came to power in Egypt in 1952 through a military coup. He was a pan-Arab nationalist who believed that Egypt's dignity required the expulsion of foreign dominance. When the United States and Britain withdrew their promised funding for the Aswan High Dam in July 1956, partly in retaliation for Nasser's dealings with the Soviet bloc, he responded within the week. On July 26, 1956, he nationalized the Suez Canal Company. He announced it in a speech in Alexandria. The crowd roared. The canal, he declared, belonged to Egypt. Britain and France were furious. They colluded secretly with Israel in what became one of the most embarrassing imperial miscalculations of the 20th century. Israel invaded the Sinai Peninsula in late October 1956. Britain and France issued ultimatums, then launched airstrikes and a naval assault to retake the Canal Zone. The plan failed, not militarily but politically. The United States, alarmed by the prospect of a Cold War crisis and unwilling to endorse naked colonialism, refused to support its allies. President Eisenhower pressured Britain, France, and Israel to withdraw. The Soviet Union threatened military intervention on Egypt's behalf, Within weeks, the invasion collapsed. The Suez Crisis was a hinge in modern history. It confirmed that Britain and France were no longer first rank powers, that the age of European empire was over. It clarified that the Cold War's two superpowers, America and the Soviet Union, now set the rules. And for Egypt, it was a moment of triumph, so complete that Nasser became the most celebrated Arab leader of his generation. The canal has remained under Egyptian sovereignty ever since. No serious person has challenged that since 1956. It is tempting to reduce the canal to a logistics problem. Ships go through, fees are paid, trade flows. This undersells it badly. The canal is the reason that a Japanese car assembled with Australian steel and German electronics can reach a European dealer within weeks. It is why oil from the Persian Gulf powers factories in southern Europe. It is why the global manufacturing economy is organized the way it is. Stretched thin, specialized, interdependent, and astonishingly vulnerable. The Ever Given's grounding in 2021 made this vulnerability impossible to ignore. For 6 days, approximately 400 vessels waited, unable to pass. Cargo worth an estimated $54 billion was delayed. Companies discovered that their supply chains, meticulously optimized for speed and cost, had no slack. A single blocked canal meant empty shelves, idle factories, and missed contracts. The crisis passed, but it left a question that supply chain managers and governments are still wrestling with. What does it mean to build a global economy through a single bottleneck? In 2014, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi announced an expansion project he called the New Suez Canal. The plan added a 35-kilometer parallel channel, deepened and widened existing sections, and reduced transit times substantially. The government raised $8 billion through public investment certificates, asking ordinary Egyptians to buy bonds in the project. Millions did. The expanded canal opened in August 2015 amid nationalist celebration. Sisi presented it as proof that Egypt could act decisively, independently, and at scale. The canal remains what it has always been, a narrow cut through which an enormous amount of the world's commerce and an enormous amount of historical tension continues to flow. To understand the Suez Canal is to understand that geography still governs us. The distance between continents still matter. The question of who controls the passage between them still matter. We can build tunnels and canals and container ships the size of small towns, but we cannot escape the fact that the world is physical, the trade routes are real, and that whoever holds the narrow places holds something genuinely powerful. Ferdinand de Lesseps knew this. Nasser knew this. Egypt knows this today. The Ever Given reminded the rest of us.